Let's take a peek behind the curtain, lads. So what's the one thing that the establishment in Europe and America and basically everywhere else lets you know constantly that they're most terrified of? You?
White people.
Yeah, me specifically.
Yeah, just Harry Robinson.
They're going and they're having secret board meetings, Parliament, the cabinet. Right now, I think we need to fix this Harry Robinson problem. He's becoming too powerful.
Finally, someone's addressing it.
His hair is getting too long. We need to get him a haircut.
Pin him down and get a barber quick.
And I say, no, no, you cannot cut my hair. This is the strands of golden freedom.
Is this actually what the segment's about?
No,
oh.
It's absolutely not. No, this is a segment addressing the audience as to why I'm not cutting my hair.
All right.
I wouldn't do that. If I decide to cut my hair, I'll do it when I'm goddamn ready. Okay?
Like a free man.
Yeah, like a free man, like a man of the North. So, no, what I'm talking about is populism. Populism being that watchword that people now use to scare normies, as always, saying that democracy is being threatened by populism. It seems to be the thing that everybody in the establishment is terrified of.
Isn't democracy a form of populism?
No, because populism is giving the people what they're actually voting for, whereas democracy is the exact opposite of that. You know how in democracy they say our democracy? Exchange the word democracy for deep state or international finance, and then you've got what they're actually trying to protect.
It is quite funny to say that they're saying my democracy as if they possess it, other people are trying to take
That's
it, which is how it actually functions, isn't it, as a term?
Yeah, and I wanted to examine a part of this which I don't think gets spoken about quite as much. Now, I know that there was a live stream done last night from AA on containment, and I don't want it to overlap with that because I am kind of covering some of the same, some similar subjects, because there is a part of what you could deem the establishment or the mainstream right, which does act as a form of containment. And the thing is, they tell you about this, and they will tell you that what they are trying to avoid by highlighting particular problems that right-wing working class and middle class people are always bringing up, the sort of thing that we talk about, they say out loud that they're only talking about it to try and get it solved so that it avoids people like us voting in populists who might oust them, because they are a part of a particular club, they are part of a particular class. The populists are not of their class, they're not necessarily of our class, but they're different, they're a different group, and they don't want to get replaced by that group.
They're
now,
like,
as somebody who can empathize with the feeling of not wanting to be replaced, I can understand why they're trying so hard to protect themselves in such a way.
But these people are normally sort of progressives driving at the speed limit, aren't they?
They certainly are, but they are starting to take on more. The camouflage is beginning to get better. And a lot of them even are starting to highlight some genuine problems, which I do think that an actual right would start to solve. And I'll get onto that as we go along.
Hello folks, we just had a lovely symposium here with Harry. We discussed Humboldt's Limits of State Action, which is a classic of libertarian philosophy. I really enjoyed it, Harry. I hope you did as well.
As always, of course I did.
As always, and don't forget to subscribe. With £5 a month, you can gain access to all our premium content. See you there.
You all right there, Callum?
Yeah, just making sure my spoon's okay.
Okay, as long as the spoon is safe, all is well. First, though, I'll highlight that we've got a new symposium, which I was on with Stelios, talking about Humboldt, who was a German political philosopher and also a political statesman around the late 18th, early 19th century. His book, The Limits of State Action, which was very interesting. And while he and I disagreed on a few things, I think overall we had a very interesting and productive discussion that ended on a rather wholesome note, I must say. So I'd really, really recommend you watching that. Subscription on the website, £5 per month. You know the deal. Sign up. And I've just got some examples of what's going on in Europe at the moment, where how populism is always brought up, dredged up, you could say, as the boogeyman that you at home need to be scared of. You're worried about changes in society and want them fixed. Ooh, you best not want to do that, because that'll be populism, and populism is scary. You don't want to be replaced by Africans. Ooh, you're a populist, which means that you're a fascist, because the people are fascists, is essentially the argument that is always being used. You need to have the enlightened expert class to come in and govern everything, yada, yada, yada. This is what's going on in Poland at the moment. I'm sorry to do this to you, Callum. I know that Poland used to be your good example, but
F.
Yeah, F's in chat for Poland, boys. So Poland's new leader is hell-bent on restoring democracy, even if it means war with his populist rivals. Now, what do you imagine restoring democracy entails practically?
Does it mean loading the institutions with his cronies so that he guarantees his own victory again and again in an unfair way.
It's almost like there's a playbook to this whole thing that we see repeated again and again, because you're absolutely right there, Josh.
How did I guess?
The country's public television channel, TVP, which essentially became a mouthpiece for the previous government, see how it's a mouthpiece, it's a scary thing for the previous government, has been ripped off the air, which is a good thing because it's done for democracy, the good things. It's bad when bad people do it, and it's good when these guys just decide no. 2 senior ex-ministers in the PIS governments have also been arrested inside the presidential palace, and those on the right of Polish politics have taken to the streets in an effort to drum up pressure on the new leader, that being Donald Tusk. An egg-breaking approach to restoring democracy is what this is being characterized as.
But weren't the previous government democratically elected?
Multiple times.
Yes.
Yes.
I've never heard anything bad come from the sorts of people who compare this kind of action to breaking eggs.
You know how you to save democracy is you take over the media, arrest the opposition, and also rig the justice system by replacing all the judges with your cronies. Because that's the next thing. Is also
Okay, Joseph Stalin.
Yes. But once again, there's more than just local, that being Polish, pressure for these kinds of measures to be taken because
he's obviously a German plant from the EU.
Well, yeah, it says on the European stage, Tusk will hope to soon unfreeze funds for Poland that were blocked by the European Union over the PIS degradation of the rule of law.
But they were the governing parties. They determined the rule of law.
Yes, once again, when we come in and govern by executive action, that's the rule of law. When they do the same thing...
They pass it in Parliament, it's popular, and then they enact within the legal system what was voted on. Yeah, but the EU doesn't like it.
Yes.
Shut up.
And that's who's actually pulling the strings there. We've got more examples. These are all just relatively recent. Politico, populism keeps rattling the globe. Elites have no idea what to do. So the question is, what are they going to do in response to that? Because you are ruled by people who hate you and their corporate interests, and they think that you're fascists because you don't want your country to be sunk.
Well, I think the elites are probably indifferent to us. Like the journalistic class certainly hates ordinary people, but to call them elite is to give them too much influence.
I think if the elites had any kind of empathy, sympathy, or any feelings at all towards us that weren't anything but hatred or pure apathy, they wouldn't be so antagonistic towards us. And they wouldn't be trying to replace us in our own nations.
An attitude of entitlement, don't they? Like we're rich and powerful because we're better, basically.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. There's an example of this. What I'm talking about with the corporations is that apparently, according to The Economist recently, Donald Trump's populism is turning off corporate donors. And if we go see here, so the dark blue is corporate donations to the Republican Party, and around 2016 is when they were at the highest. But now it's dropping again to levels before George Bush. So because of the fact that Donald Trump is representing a populist wave in America, I mean, he has been for years now, supposedly, but because of that, the corporations have decided that they don't want to support him anymore. And they say that it's basically because of the fact that they don't like the fact that populism encourages economic protectionism and immigration restriction. And they want to have entirely globalized open markets, and they want to be able to replace you with cheap slave wage.
It's funny that The Economist, an outlet which would ordinarily complain about corporate money being the determiner of elections, is now saying, oh, well, this is a sign that Donald Trump is going to lose. You know, he's doing terribly because he doesn't have all this corporate money backing him. But also it's a sort of revealed preference from the corporate money.
What a horrific thing to say.
I know.
There's like the entire actual electoral system relies on corporate money from a few rich Americans.
Yes.
That's an oligarchy. That's not a democracy.
It's primarily funneled through super PACs. That's true.
But if the corporations aren't putting the money in, it means that they genuinely believe that Trump is going to express populist policies and therefore he can't be bought. Surely that's a positive indicator.
And to be fair, in this same graphic, it shows the Democrats are not funded as much by corporations and seem, or at least as much as the Republicans are. They're more funded by labor groups, but let's be honest, most of those labor groups will be another super PAC similar way to funnel money from elite interests and massive billionaires to these political parties.
Some of them are certainly large enough to function in that way, aren't they?
Yes, they absolutely are. But the thing is with populism is it turns out when you have leaders who are supposedly populist in charge, it's quite good and people get what they want and people's lives become easier and more fulfilling, which is why the Financial Times, for instance, has to start asking questions like this. Why hasn't populism done more economic harm? Yeah, that's a good question. Why hasn't it? Why hasn't closing off globalist interests done more harm economically? Why is it that the GDP line probably went down a little bit or just stayed the same level, but people didn't immediately start selling them on the streets because they found themselves in economic ruin?
Strange, isn't it?
This is a good question. Perhaps it's that making sure that people have jobs and decent wages in those jobs in a local area means that they get to live good lives. But no, according to this article, I'm not going to read any of it, but I read through it, and the gist of it is basically, it does actually cause economic collapse. It's just that the economic collapse only ever happens after the populists get voted out, which is why it looks like
trust me, bro.
Which is why it looks like Joe Biden's the one who caused all of this economic damage. Donald Trump didn't have to deal with the Ukraine-Russia crisis and all of the sanctions that we were forced at gunpoint by, I don't know, God or something, to put all of those sanctions on Russia. I mean, seriously, it's an absolute joke. And then here's another one. What's the benefit? Why do people vote populist? Well, it's because the maths of right-wing populism are easy answers and confidence equals reassuring certainty. This is political posturing. This is sloganeering. This means absolutely nothing.
I always kind of hate that when people are like, you're just providing easy answers. It's like, well, why are your answers so incomprehensibly stupid?
Yeah. Well,
like I'm not for people providing obviously false things, but you do run into like the block of text or just someone wasting your time just waffling. And it's like, I've got nothing out of this. You have nothing. I can tell you have nothing.
Well, the easy answer is population going up, house prices going up, native population staying same, immigration at record levels.
Yeah.
There is actually an easy answer.
That's exactly what I mean. Like that's comprehensible. Whereas what you will get out of a Tory politician is some blocko text about how lower wages means lower prices, which means you're more wealthy. Trust me. And so what?
Inflation.
What address anything?
Josh, you'll know this. You'll have internalized this out of sheer rage. What's the mainstream explanation for why inflation happens? Because the easy answer.
Don't make me say it.
The easy answer is that the money printer go brr, and more money means those individual tokens of money are worth less comparatively. What's the mainstream reason that they always give?
Well, there have been lots of reasons. Like I saw an article saying it's your fault for buying expensive things. That's why inflation is high, and things like that.
It's not that the currency supply is inflated; it's that you pay more for things.
They go,
oh, it's literally in the name. Inflation.
What happens is the Bank of England goes, more people are shopping at Marks and Spencer's. Print more money. Print more money. We have to print more money. They need to go.
How else are they going to buy Marks and Spencer's goods?
They have to go back to Lidl, God damn it.
So who's more responsible for inflation? The Bank of England or Marks and Spencer's?
I don't know.
And who's got the money printer?
And then even ostensibly right-wing organizations like the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian-leaning think tank, produce articles like this from 2019 called The Terrifying Rise of Authoritarian Populism. Now, this one's particularly painful and ironic, given that the Cato Institute was co-founded by Murray Rothbard, who was an out-and-out and very proud populist.
Yeah.
Who wrote articles about it and how he thought that America needed to take back charge of its borders and how they needed more power in the hands of the people, or at least leaders doing things for the people rather than for their own interests. But the Cato Institute wants you to know that only authoritarians would ever want to do anything.
Hang on a minute. The article appeared in September 2019's issue of Reason. So they're the bad libertarians. They're the kind that I don't like.
Oh my lord. But to address what I was mentioning at the beginning of this segment, you do start to get this shift of the right wing, where the right wing, supposedly the right wing, likes to say the populism is terrifying as well. And this brings me on to something that I found very disappointing. Now, Stelios sent me this interview from The Spectator. Andrew Neil speaking with Christopher Caldwell, who's a member of the Claremont Institute, talking about how immigration and net zero will stir up Europe's populist right. And I thought that this was interesting because it is a somewhat peek behind the curtain of how people in these power structures operate and what they're talking about and why they do the things that they do. Because Christopher Caldwell is an author that I actually quite enjoy, or at least I enjoy one of his books, that being The Age of Entitlement, which is still a book I would recommend anybody to read because it's an examination of America since the 60s, as the subtitle would tell you, and it goes into a lot of the failings of things like the Civil Rights Act, leading to affirmative action, the lowering of standards, the lowering of living standards for Americans, also the failings of the Reagan administration. He points out quite notably, I think in the very first sentence when he starts talking about Reagan, that under Reagan's leadership, the American deficit tripled, which for a small government doesn't sound like small government.
You cocked up.
Yeah, he also talks about the problem with the Immigration and Nationality Act. I think that was in '86, which gave amnesty to all of the illegals, which just told other illegals who wanted to come into the country, if you stick around long enough, then eventually you'll get amnesty.
I love how that is the immigration equivalent of the Purge, which is like, all crime that has been committed against this nation's borders, legal.
Yep, there you go. Just for one day.
You won't do it again.
Imagine doing that at a smaller scale. Like, all home invasion is now legal.
It's all forgiven. Headley. Why? Because there's just so many home invaders.
Yeah,
it's not an argument.
It's a terrible idea and terrible thing that happened. He also very critical, as I mentioned, of the Civil Rights Act. It says here, the book received considerable attention for its chapters addressing the consequences of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Although originally conceived as a one-time corrective to end segregation and racial discrimination, Caldwell argues that the act created an endless imperative for social re-engineering at a great cost at the expense of liberty and social cohesion. And he makes that argument very well, to the point where people like Oran McIntyre and other people who are on what I would consider to be the actual right wing use this as an excellent starter entry point for people who want to examine those arguments. And it is a very good argument. So the Civil Rights Act says that you have a duty, essentially, to show that you are not racist. It doesn't say that you need to implement quotas or anything, but when you start to throw that into the courts, how is the court going to have any objective measure to prove that you're not racist? Prove that you didn't beat your wife last night, Josh.
I don't have a wife.
Still.
You could have beaten her.
Yeah, you could have beaten her, though. You're going to need proof.
You don't have a wife because you beat her to death. That's why.
Yeah. So as a company...
You got me.
As a company, how do you have proof that you're not racist? Well, you say, well, we don't have discriminatory hiring practices, but then they go, but your staff is almost entirely white. How does that happen if you're not discriminating? So then...
Guilty.
Yeah, exactly. That's how the judges and the courts worked. So that ends up adding in a lot of legislation and a lot of court decisions that essentially mandate quotas for affirmative action, which inevitably means that they have to end up lowering standards because, well, we're not biased in our hiring practices right now, and we've ended up almost all entirely white and Asian. So I guess we'll have to lower those standards if we want to be able to get people in who aren't white and Asian. That's how it happened. It's a very interesting book. And this really disappointed me in this interview because of the way that he's talking about populism and the discussions in Europe to do with populism with Andrew Neil, who we all know is a traitor.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the arguments he was making in Age of Entitlement were very populist. But then when you start to see the way he discusses problems like this, you begin to realize what's going on. It's similar. Essentially, the book, as I can tell, because he's still talking from within the ruling classes, within the institutions like the Claremont Institute of the ruling classes. What it's saying is to other people within his elite strata, we're screwing up here, and people are starting to notice. So we need to fix this before we get kicked out. That's what all of this is to do. And let's see some examples. And this is when they're talking about immigration into Europe and problems that it's created in places like France.
And Christopher, Andrew mentions Macron. Of course, Macron actually did team up with Le Pen recently when it came to his plans on immigration because he needed the support. How much of this do you think is being driven on the continent by concerns over immigration? Do you think that is the main push?
It's a very interesting thing because immigration is really not at its peak now, either in the short term or in the broad picture of things. We're in the winter now. There are fewer boats coming across from Africa, and we're not even really having a major push the way we did in 2015. But everyone's thinking about it, and it's kind of interesting that in France, in November, there was a stabbing in the Drôme, which is down in southeastern France, sort of near Grenoble. The kids who did the stabbing were all French, but they were of migrant background. And there was something about the incident that really got people hyped up about migration. The issue is big. I think there's no question about it.
That's probably because multiple sources said that they were saying it in Arabic, and also one of them said, "We're here to kill white people," and they just turned up to this event in a small village and indiscriminately started trying to stab people. That's probably what got under people's skin.
Well, note the complete disconnected language that he was using. They were French, but of migrant origin. So they weren't
French. No, of course they weren't.
And speaking about it like it's one isolated incident.
And it's not. Yeah, they've had
I always love
stabbings
the
constantly. Yeah,
They speak such good Arabic. It's the best.
Even in North Africa, sorry. Even in North Africa, you know, they're colonies of the Muslim-speaking world. They speak French. So, just saying.
Yeah, so that really disappointed me because I would expect somebody who wrote such an excellent and piercing book on the subject of what was going on in America would at least interject that this is a terrible thing that happened instead. So what it gives me the impression of, as I mentioned, is that this interview is so that people who are in parliament or in positions of political power who check out The Spectator.
People who have not been paying attention for the last 10 years.
People who've not been paying attention go, oh, wow, we should fix that before people vote populists in. And you can see the exact line of reasoning from Andrew Neil here. I think this is a very telling clip as to why exactly it is that the establishment don't want populists in.
I'm more concerned, though, that this rise in right-wing populism is really serious and bad news for Europe. And it's not for the normal reasons. People tend to talk about right-wing populists as just they're a bit more right-wing than the mainstream right. But that's not the way to see it. They stand for things entirely different than the mainstream right. Now, you look at Europe, which in my view is a continent in real trouble and a continent in serious decline. The European Union's economy, even without Britain, used to be the same size as the United States. Now it's a fraction of the United States. Europe is in economic decline. It has a revanchist Russia already causing mayhem in the Ukraine, and who knows if it is allowed to win there, where it will go from there. At heart in Europe, you have a problem of governments are too big, taxation is too high, and regulation is omnipresent. So let's just take the economic circumstances of Europe at the moment and the problem with Russia and Mr. Putin. What did the right-wing populists bring to that? Well, first of all, they're big government people. They ain't Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. They believe in big government. Indeed, if you take Madame Le Pen in France, her economic policies are not that different from Mr. Mélenchon, who is the Jeremy Corbyn of France. They believe in big government. They believe in government intervention. They believe in government control of industry. They believe in protectionism. They do not believe in markets or Jeffersonian type limited government or taxation. So that doesn't help Europe to move down that road. And then you take the second thing. You would sometimes think, as was the case in the old days in America, where it was, say, Ronald Reagan versus Jerry Ford, two Republicans. Reagan was the more right wing and therefore the more hard line against Russia in the Cold War. That's not true with this populist right. They like President Putin. They've got a soft spot for the Kremlin. They repeat Kremlin talking points when they appear. Look at Mrs. Maloney's party, although she has not gone down that road. Madame Le Pen had one of her election campaigns bankrolled by pro-Putin banks. So if you take the two big threats that Europe faces, one, Russia, the second, a declining economy, a sclerotic economy, the populist right can only make them worse.
I don't think he
Chris,
said
would you agree with that?
I think if we pause that,
sorry, but literally
with part-
nothing he said maps onto reality. The idea that we're living 50 years ago, we're not. There's been 50 years since the 70s. And
great observation.
Well, Andrew
What?
Neil,
Sorry, but that's
Andrew
what he's
Neil is
missing.
old enough. He may not remember that anymore.
yeah, so he's sitting there being like, oh man, they're not free marketeers like the mainstream right. You live in Britain. We do not have some low tax, low intervention, free market system. What are you talking about?
We basically live in a socialist state.
We have the highest
Out of his
taxes since
mind.
Zivor. I mean, the level of regulation is so unattractive. Most companies set up in Ireland or anywhere else if they can help it. No one invests in this country if you make money in this country. You invest internationally. There's just nothing you say has any mapping on to where you live. Never mind some abstract place you're thinking of. You live in this place and don't know where you live.
Well, I think one of the things to take away from that is that he clearly sees that the populist right is outside of his class and has different interests to him. The old right that he appreciated, like Reagan's right, despite the fact that he says, oh, Reagan was so small government, he's speaking to the guy who wrote a book that mentions how government exploded the deficit of the government. He never actually calls him out on that one, by the way, as the interview goes on. What they value is international markets and international wars. We need to be aggressive internationally, both financially and militarily. Whereas the populist right supposedly are saying we need to have more closed markets, which you may disagree with, Josh, but
It depends
there's
on
some
the
variety.
circumstance,
There's some variety in opinion there. And they also need to be a little bit more isolationist. We shouldn't be going out and doing military interventions in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe.
What are we
or
getting
anywhere
out
else.
of it?
Yeah,
If we get nothing, well, no.
What are we getting out of it? So it's this fundamental shift in priority that they don't want because they know that it's so different to them. They don't have a place in that order anymore, which is why
That fundamental difference, I think you're right on the money, is it in our interest? That's both of those questions there. Whereas the populist right ask that question, and then if it's not, say, well, bugger off then. That question isn't even asked by his worldview.
Well, it is, but his interests are opposed to the interests of the man on the street, like you or I. Whereas the populists at least sympathize with the man on the street and want to make life a bit better for him. And the interesting thing as well is that this was all for Spectator, and it's worth noting here that Spectator is currently edited, I believe, by Fraser Nelson. And if we go out of this video clip, John, and go to what I've got next on the links.
You'll have to get.
Oh, am I going to? Oh, yeah. Oh, wait. Oh, God. Here. Oh, God. We're very professional here. If we go to the next link. So, Kunli Drukpa posted this back in, I think it was December, when Fraser Nelson was saying about how we shouldn't restrict immigration because it means that think of all of the concert pianists that we might be kicking out of the country. It's interesting to note that back in 2017, he had this interview where he just said this outright about essentially containment techniques.
What's her experience so far of her short premiership is if you persuade people that you're listening to what they have to say, that you don't reject their concerns as being bigoted or xenophobic, that if you talk in a language that is more in common with neglected voters than it is with the metropolitan fashionable elites, then that goes a long way. You don't have to come up with policies, banning immigrants or anything like that. All you need to do is to basically say to people, I hear your concerns. I mean, let's look at David Cameron. He actually, I think, did quite a good job here as well. Nobody expected him to win a majority in 2015, but he did. And he had a policy of cutting immigration by 2/3. Now, he completely failed in that target, but the fact that he had that target counted for a lot because it meant people thought at least he wanted to control immigration. And
lie.
There you go. Literally, that's what he's saying, is just lie. Pretend like you care about people's issues and then do what you were going to do anyway. I mean, fantastic. And that's one of the ways that they are kind of containing the populism that's been rising up in Europe recently. We'll see how people like Geert Wilders and others go. But the fact is that some of these people who over the past few years were presented to us as being the rise of the new fascism, the new populism in Europe, they're going to kick all of the foreigners out. They're going to close all of their borders and their markets. It's going to be just like 1933 all over again, whether through the European Union or other ways or other means, were contained masterfully. Maloney, instead of actually doing the things that she said, is instead gone to the Shoah Museum on Holocaust Remembrance Day and complained about Nazi fascist evil. This was the woman who was sold as the heir to Mussolini's throne, who was going to put military blockades on the Mediterranean Sea. Instead of doing that, she's signaling her anti-fascism
Well, she didn't turn out to be the Nazi everyone said she was.
But she also didn't turn out to be useful, really. There's only
the more fundamental point being that her main campaign was stopping illegal immigration. And I believe recently she said that she's going to increase legal immigration and do nothing about illegal. Well, that was pointless then.
I think it's something ridiculous like 835,000 new immigrants needed in Italy to fill up jobs vacancies by 2025.
She went from, maybe we shouldn't be invaded by people coming here illegally to, well, more immigrants equals more good within 6 months.
Fantastic. And then we also have Marine Le Pen, another new Hitler in waiting. We were told for years, saying that actually I can't support the AfD anymore because they suggested that maybe we shouldn't have all of this foreign population in Germany who are actively hostile to us. That's too far.
They were literally chanting death to the Jews. That's what they're talking about here.
Well, that's too far. That's too far. You need those people in your society. They're productive members of society, Callum, and if you want to get rid of them, you're a populist, which means that you're the reincarnation of Hitler. So I don't know what we're going to do about this. I can hope that the people who have been voted into quite a few places in Europe recently, like Geert Wilders, I can hope that they're going to end up doing something that will be positive for Europe as a whole. But we'll just have to see, because these things can easily happen. And also be aware of the people that you're reading the books of. Even if the book is very good, it might be that they wrote it for an audience that isn't you.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Brokenomics series, this episode on Islam with Robert Spencer. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.